Hi, everyone. This is Thomas Nuth from DeNexus, Head of Marketing. I'm joined by Lynn Bussin, and Patrick Miller of Ampere Industrial Security. Thank you for joining the webinar, NERC CIP in the Cloud, What Next? I do appreciate all those that saw our posting on the various social forums that we use, LinkedIn events, as well as on our webpage and our social channels. You saw the blog 2 weeks ago, also referencing the NERC CIP changes, most specifically the proposed NERC CIP reliability standards, NERC CIP-004-7 and CIP-011-3 for BCSI access management. Now, I think the majority of us understand it as something to do with cloud and cloud storage, and the use of that, of course, with our power providers in North America. Coming from a cybersecurity background myself, and a lot of it being an industrial, this was a very interesting change. Out of the over 2,700 page update, there's a lot to crawl through there. So we had a lot of great reaction and interaction with the blog from yours truly, Lynn Bussin, on this call today, speaking and writing about that and kind of distilling that long proposed update into just a few key takeaways. But we thought that this webinar was, really poignant and needed from our base to crawl into what these changes mean and address them in a little bit more detail with, of course, one person from our very own DeNexus, but also an external person that has obviously a lot of experience on the compliance side, Patrick Miller. So with that, could we introduce the panelists, beginning with you, Patrick?
Thank you, Thomas. I'm Patrick Miller. I am CEO and owner of Ampere Industrial Security. Long history in industrial control systems back into the 80s, believe it or not. And I'm a recovering regulator. So I get the dubious honor of actually being the first NERC CIP auditor in the nation. And we set up the first program under the WEC region under NERC. That was the first one out of the gate. They actually wrote some of the original language in CIP version 1, 2, and 3 and some interpretations. So I got a deep history on the standards themselves. Still on some guidance working groups and other attachments to the process in terms of standards development for NERC. And of course, now as a consulting firm, that's pretty much what we do, is we help organizations with their CIP issues and other related industrial security problems. Thank you.
Great. And Jamie, you're a former asset owner, or at least in compliance within industrial infrastructure. So can you give us a little bit of background as well?
Sure. I wish my background was as impressive as Patrick's, maybe one day. I've been in the energy business for about 10 years, a little bit over 10 years. I started my career as a system operator and worked up my way into compliance, where I have helped run the first compliance program for the first generation only balancing authority within WEC. And then throughout my career, I basically worked for all types of asset owners, from vertically integrated to solar developers. Now I'm running DeNexus's compliance program.
Fantastic. Yeah, happy to have you. And myself as moderator, I'm of course here to be the moderator, but just as a quick introduction, as I said, Thomas Nuth. Background is predominantly, we've been in cybersecurity, SaaS offerings, both split between the industrial ICS/OT space, but also IT as well. So it's really interesting to kind of see NERC CIP and the adherence to it evolve. As a marketer and a product marketer within this tech space, it's always been a key focus of various companies that I've worked for over the last 12 years. And it's been interesting to see it evolve. It's always been really critical, important in North America, but it's also kind of seemed to be, in some sense, a indicator of change, not for the NIST directive in the EU and the UK recently evolving, but also just let's say the critical infrastructure and OT space in general. So NERC CIP's always been kind of close to us. I've definitely kept my finger on that pulse in product marketing for a number of years. So I think this topic is really interesting, and now it involves cloud. We didn't think cloud would ever get into the power arena. So, but here it is. So that kind of brings us to the topics. Before we jump into the questions, I wanted to let everyone know that we have 3 poll questions that I am going to launch here in a matter of a minute or two. I'm going to cover them really quick. And we will email as a follow-up correspondence to those that attended the webinar, as well as those that have registered and are going to watch this on demand. Question 1, NERC CIP panel poll. How will the cloud affect you? That question is, what CIP impact ratings apply to your utility operation? High impact, medium impact, low impact, or none at all? Feel free to select more than one. Of course, we understand that environments are broad and disparate, and you might be managing a whole variant degree of different areas with different priorities. Question 2, what best describes your operation use of cloud? This will be multiple choice as well. Are you evaluating cloud for OT data? Are you using cloud for OT data already? Do you not intend on ever leveraging cloud technologies within the network? Or are you evaluating cloud for IT right now, or using cloud for IT right now? Okay. And then question 3, how will the BCSI rather, proposed changes affect your organization? No change at all? Welcome change to use third-party cloud services? Or are you resistant and highly limited, or have a highly limited use of third-party cloud services? So I am going to launch that poll right now. Feel free to engage sometime within the next half hour while we cover this topic. Okay, it is launched. Okay, so getting into questions, this is the part where I get to be quiet, which I'm happy to do that. Sorry for talking too much. Jamie, you wrote the blog 2 weeks ago. You crawled through that 2,700 page document. Patrick, you certainly did as well, obviously the nature of your business. So what are the changes? Let's give a flyby proposed to NERC.
Sure, I'll try to do this quickly and make it not too boring. Sorry if I put anybody to sleep already in advance. So the proposed changes, as Tom had mentioned, are for NERC standard reliability, CIP-004 personnel and training, and CIP-11 information protections. The changes try to address the topic of BCSI and the usage of cloud providers. So the changes for CIP-004 remove references to designated storage locations, which focuses the requirements on provisioned access to BCSI, not where they are stored. This is done by adding a 6th requirement, which states entities must have a documented access management program to authorize, verify, and revoke provisioned access to BCSI pertaining to applicable systems. Applicable systems are high impact BCSI cyber systems and their associated ECOMs and PACs, medium impact BES cyber systems with external routable connectivity, and their associate ECOMs and PACs. R6 is broken into 3 parts like NERC likes to do. R6.1 deals with the authorizing both of electronic and physical access of BCSI. R6.2 requires entities to verify once every 15 calendar months individuals who have provisioned access to BCSI by 1, having an authorized record list, whatever that may be, and 2, confirming individuals still need access. So doing your confirmation that they still have the needs for the access. And R6.3 addresses termination. So in this requirement, they require you to remove access within the next calendar day of the affected termination. So that's the main changes to CIP-4. CIP-11, you'll find the major changes in R1. R1 now requires entities to have a documented information protection program for BES cyber system information BCSI pertaining to applicable systems identified in Table 1, R1. Applicable systems are the same as the previous versions, so those have not changed. What the proposed changes are trying to do are simplify and clarify the language more than anything else. So for R1.1, they remove redundancy. In R1.2, they try to focus the requirement on protection of BCSI from unauthorized access, no matter where it is located and its state. So in use, in storage, or in transit. So the standards themselves read, or the requirements themselves read, R1.1 states methods to identify BCSI, and R1.2 states methods to protect and securely handle BCSI to mitigate risk of compromising confidentiality. There's other minor changes that the industry is trying to align all standards with, i.e. replacing SPS with RAS, interchange coordinator and interchange authority is removed from applicability, and putting BCSI using the acronym instead of BCS cyber system information where it makes sense. The implementation standard is NERC's traditional implementation standard wording, but it's 24 calendar months after the effective date of the commission's order approving the proposed reliability standard. Patrick, if I missed anything, please feel free to jump in.
No, that's it. I think other than the interesting note of starting to remove all the guidelines and technical basis from the standards as well. But no, that was a great summary. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think you said it briefly, Jamie, there. By the way, thank you for being Cliff Notes for us. This has been
Yeah, that was as
Yeah.
Cliff Notes as I could be.
Well, you said the acronym. For those that are on the call that are not necessarily from the practitioner standpoint, they're providing a solution. They're, a SaaS offering, a cloud offering, which there are a few. Let's just go over what BCSI means. What the heck is BCSI, I guess, is the question. Going to give us a summary there?
I'll let Patrick go with that one.
Okay. BCSI, there is a definition in the NERC glossary of terms. So for any standard, any capitalized word in any standard, you can always find that in the NERC glossary of terms. And versus try to navigate NERC's website, just Google NERC glossary of terms. It's way faster. But it is effectively information about the BES cyber system. And that's really the important stuff that runs the grid that could be used to gain an unauthorized access or pose a security threat to that system. They go on to give a distinction that says it's actually BCSI does not include individual pieces of information that by themselves do not pose a threat or could not be used to allow unauthorized access to the system. So think of it like the personally identifiable information or PII. If you just have a list of names, no big deal. But if you have a list of names and socials or socials and address, so if it's just a list of like IP addresses or host names, then in theory, that's not in scope. But they go on to list some of the legacy stuff that came out of the original CIP version 1 through 4, when this was back in CIP 3, it got its own standard, became CIP 11. But it's stuff like information about the BES cyber system, physical access control systems, electronic access control or monitoring systems, and stuff that's not publicly available, right? Anything that would be collections of network addresses, network topologies, this kind of thing. So, the challenge with this is, the definition for this is so wide from if you look at this from somebody who does pen testing on these kinds of systems, I mean, almost any shred of information can be useful to them. If you look at this from somebody who's trying to drive a compliance program, you want to limit this down to the, some manageable kind of information. So the unfortunate part of this definition is it's so wide you could drive a Mack truck through it from an interpretation standpoint. So I wish there was a better definition, but that's what we're left with for now.
Makes sense. That one clarifies for that. Thanks for the clarification. By the way, before I get into the next one, this one's for you. This question, Patrick. I want to let everyone know. Please do the poll questions. Looks like we already have 44% of participation for the attendees that are live right now. That's great. That other, 56%, it's going to be illuminating, I think, when we send out a thank you email. So definitely interested to see your perspective. All right, so we covered BCSI. We've covered the changes that are proposed to NERC. Now, Patrick, what's the likelihood of this proposal actually being passed? It says proposal. We look at that and we're like, this is interesting. Is this multi-thousand page proposal actually going to be what we think is going to actually be approved? Is it going to actually materialize in the NERC CIP guidelines, or should it be amended? So what's the process look like from your past?
Yeah, this is one of the standard, really lengthy, convoluted compliance processes. So where we are at this stage is basically the industry writes these standards, right? This isn't NERC or FERC writing them. The industry writes their own standards, then the industry then approves their own standards. After that, then the NERC Board of Trustees approves it, which is where we are now. It gets submitted after that to FERC, and then FERC takes a look at it, decides what they want to do, and they've got basically 3 options. They can remand it, which just says, no, we're not going to do this. They can approve it with recommendations, or they can just approve it flat out with no recommendations. Almost always, if they don't remand it, which has only happened rare cases, they usually approve, but they say, okay, yes, we're going to approve this, but do the following things. So I expect that'll be the case with this. It's closer to the mark than I've seen for a lot of standards that have been submitted lately. I think we're going to get some, directives from FERC basically when they approve it. That's my suspicion. I think they're going to approve it. I don't think they're going to remand it. So if they do approve it, I think the recommendations are going to be fairly lightweight. They might talk about some of the low impact stuff or including some other things around different types of systems, because they're trying to. Most of the recommendations I see they come back, well, directives I see they come back from FERC are trying to manage current threats. So expect some of that stuff when they come back. But I do think it'll make it through. And in terms of timeline, all bets are off. I've seen some of these things sit there for 4 or 5 years. I do think this one will come through a little bit quicker just because it's been so long coming. We've been asking for standards on cloud for, 10 years or more. And this one's gone through, it was its 3rd round of drafting before it finally got approved by the ballot body, which is the entities. So we've been trying to get to this stage for a long time. We finally have something the industry is okay with and they're comfortable with and they're willing to move forward. They put it forth to FERC. FERC knows that there's a lot of pressure to try to get something in the cloud available, just because for a million obvious reasons, the ability to use cloud for DCSI is sorely needed. I mean, to just most of these businesses, it's costing them a lot of money to not be able to use the cloud, and it's causing them a lot of other, management and heartburn and compliance pain as well. So I think to normalize everything from the regions, because there's been a mix of how the regions have been auditing this to how the utilities have been doing it, this will at least give us one nice level playing field, and we'll kind of know, I suspect FERC approves it. If they do, we'll at least know where they're going in terms of their recommendations. But I don't think they're going to be like heavy-handed recommendations. I think they'll be fairly light.
Well, with that said too, like this is where the polls are super interesting. Those that have already completed the 3 questions, over 20% of participants already say they're using the cloud for OT data. So, to your point, I mean, it looks like a lot of practitioners are using the cloud anyway, regardless of there being guidance for that. Is that something that
well, we actually do have some guidance. It was issued as what's called a practice guide. And the practice guides are not directed to the registered entities. They're not directed to the utilities. It's directed to the regions on how the regions are supposed to audit. So this basically tells the regions to normalize on a certain audit approach when they do. And it's allowed for the use of what we consider provisioned access, which is the new term that they're throwing in. And it basically says if you manage the keys and you can control the access, and access to encrypted BCSI without the keys, for example, is allowable, that's been out there for a while, since 2019. And it has been, I'd say, common enough approach. Some regions were going in a different direction, and that's why NERC basically said, okay, all regions align, this is our new approach, but they didn't have it in a standard. It wasn't written in the law, right? I mean, because these are federal laws. Since it wasn't, there were a lot of organizations that were very reticent to move forward based on just some hopeful guidance that their auditor would not find a violation.
That would have been me.
Yes, exactly. So this gives them the actual approval to do so with it in writing.
Yeah, that's interesting. And actually, that's a good segue too for Jamie. Like as an asset owner, or I guess I should say former asset owner, you'd be looking at these technologies and evaluating them. How do you interpret this change? Would this be something that you would have welcomed in the past, or would this been something that you would stay kind of clear of?
I would have loved it as a former asset owner. So I have to put it out there. I was a very conservative compliance person. I followed the rules. I read, there was no gray. This is what we had to do. And if it doesn't say we can do it within the standards, I would not suggest to do it. If a company chose to do it on their own, that's their risk. But from a compliance perspective, I didn't take risk. So I would have been, as an asset owner, I wouldn't have touched BCSI in the cloud or the cloud at all. And now that there is this standard, I would be working with my SMEs, getting ready to figure out how to transition to the BCSI, storing it in the cloud, getting things ready, but I wouldn't pull the trigger until the standard was enforceable. Mm-hmm. What I think this does for entities that are less conservative than it gives them exact guidance on if once the standard is approved of what really the NERC's going to be looking for, so they can align their program in that now. So there's no transition for them, I would say, once the standard is enforceable anyways. But this change is great once it's approved. It would make me a very conservative person, a happy person to use BCSI in the cloud. Yeah. But before then, what Patrick was talking about, I wouldn't have signed off on. Yeah. Unless I was told I had to with my company. But from a compliance hat, I would have said, no, thank you.
Well, with that perspective, I mean, it's certainly going to grease the skids in the adoption of cloud technologies, where I think that, from a product marketing perspective, a few years ago, we wouldn't even try, right? I mean, the feedback from the market is cloud cloud. There's not going to be any cloud here in the substation arena, and not the case anymore at all. Okay, well, Patrick, coming from the other side of the table, the regulator position, what challenges do you think that this presents NERC and the average utility asset owner? We've talked about the benefits and how we think it's going to change the way that they approach compliance. Do you think that this is going to cause any challenges for them?
I do. I mean, anytime this comes out, anytime there's changes, or even a standard, the auditability comes into question. Is how is this going to be audited? And we're going to start looking at some extremely technical approaches to how BCSI is controlled and managed. So is this going to be, in some sort of, SAN NAS, we're looking at LUN controls? Are we looking at just container controls? Are we looking at buckets? Are we looking at, all of these, this new completely different and complex array of forms of access control now come into question. And it's not just one of them, it's how they work together as, various systems or components of systems or subsystems. So I think that's going to be challenging from the auditor's perspective, is frankly getting ramped up on understanding what all of these mean. So I think that it's incumbent on the auditors to, frankly read up and get qualified to actually audit all of this. Because in some cases, I think there are some cloud providers that will basically see this as a boon for business, and they'll rush out and say, hey, we've got, we'll put a big shiny NERC CIP banner out front and put NERC CIP stickers all over the product. And it's got this brand new NERC CIP push. And in reality, behind the scenes, it probably doesn't meet muster, because rush to market always happens. Not, blaming any vendors or picking on anybody. I get it. It's okay. Just do your homework. Because if the CIP auditors come and as a utility, you don't understand it, you can't explain it to your auditors, you can't justify the approach you've taken, don't just trust what the vendor marketing says. Because in some cases, they may have something that they feel is good, or they feel actually passes the bar, when in reality, the auditor won't see it the same way. So you need to really understand, get under the hood, pull all the wires out, check all the documentation, and dot all your I's and cross your T's, because my suspicion is the auditors are already reading up on how to audit this from a technical perspective. So, your SMEs need to be able to not only understand, but explain and justify the approach that you've taken, because this is opening up a Pandora's box, because in theory, your information is no longer under your control 100% unless you can absolutely justify that. And the tendency for data to want to be free and for entropy to creep in is always there. So you may have set this up perfectly, but then drift happens and you lose control of it in some way. So it's going to take a lot of additional vigilance for you to understand your environment so that you can explain it to the auditors. And on the auditor side, you're going to be constantly reading new documentation on whatever cloud provider X has some new whiz bang method to do this, and they've got a BCSI sticker, NERC certified on the outside of it. You got to go dig into that too as an auditor and figure out if it really works or not. So I think the level of technical complexity is really going to make this the only, rest of it is going to be procedural, and the controls are going to be relatively the same as the others. But it's once you get below that and you get into the technical depth, that's going to be the new landscape for us to try to navigate.
So this is going to make more potential mistakes available to be made. And Jamie, per your perspective as a former asset owner, this would be something that you'd welcome, but you're, as a conservative, asset owner, you'd already be engaging your SMEs. So I guess the takeaway that I hear is that this is a welcome change. It's required. It's already needed. Asset owners are using cloud, and now maybe this will open up them to utilize this technology a little bit more. But it's going to cause, I guess, a kind of a talent gap, perhaps. Is that correct? Yeah,
it'll be a skill gap for a while. Mm-hmm.
So I think this is the final question. This is a half an hour panel. I think this is really useful. But I think that one thing that I'm really interested in is, 10 years ago, cloud, will it enter OT in general? It wasn't even a power conversation. There was arguments there. Now we're here. Cloud is being used already. Now we're going to regulate it with NERC CIP. What's your perspective of next steps? How does this change cybersecurity and tech ops in the USA? And do you guys think it's going to filter elsewhere? Do you think this is not a lagging indicator, but a leading indicator of what's going to happen in industries in Europe, Asia Pac, and any commentary there that'd be useful?
Go ahead, Jamie.
Oh, this is, I mean, my instinct just says all these cybersecurity frameworks are always kind of built upon each other and they grow together. So I think once one does it, the other frameworks will do it as well. So I think we will see the adoption of cloud and storing cloud, storing, sorry, oh my gosh, what am I trying to say? Critical infrastructure information in the cloud will become more predominant in the industry. I think within the NIST directive in the EU, probably it'll be addressed, and I think we will see it grow. How fast that will happen, who knows? Everything moves at a snail's pace, but I do think they all are connected. Patrick, you probably have a better answer.
No, I do think it is a leading indicator. I mean, and we're really only talking about information about these systems being in the cloud, right? We're not talking about operations being in the cloud yet. And that's still,
I was gonna say not yet.
Right. That's still expressly forbidden, right? You're not allowed to do that yet, unless you can really provide all of the controls, which would be exceedingly difficult. So it's not forbidden, but it's, we'll just say prohibitively impossible. So given that, I do think that at some point we will be looking at operations in the cloud. And it's going to be a situation where there are shops out there right now that are struggling to get IT people, to get them, to retain them, and the IT OT balance. I mean, there's, you know, there are only so many unicorns out there that can do all of these things. There is a bit of a workforce shortage. Some would argue that it's an HR shortage and an HR understanding of what we're looking for. Either way, the mix creates a challenge for getting people to fill these roles. That said, you know, when we try to put operations in the cloud, I think we're looking at a very different discussion. But this at least starts the conversation, right? So if we were going to do something like that, we at least have kind of a tiny little space of common ground to begin maybe talking about that here in the near future. And I'm actually a proponent of it. I know that may sound like heresy to some, but I've seen some of the organizations that I've seen, they would, the way they are managing their IT and their OT, they would do better with somebody who does that for a living, you know, and that's all they do, and they're much better at it, and they could outsource it to somebody like that. So I do think that not everybody fits that option, right? But for some, that it could actually be a better option than what they have. We'll get there someday, but I do think this is a leading indicator. Other standards around the world, yeah, you bet. I mean, it stands to reason. There's a reason this happened. There's a reason it took this long, but we're here. And I mean, we even look at, you know, FedRAMP and some other options for classified data in the cloud. I mean, NSA, CIA, they haven't got their own cloud. So why can't the power industry have its own cloud again? Not for operations yet, but just data about operations. So yeah, I think this is the start of an interesting new trend.
I think it will make some of these intrusion and defense and IDS solutions in general a little bit more functional as well. I mean, we're seeing capabilities that DeNexus is rolling out. Armis from the IoT perspective, they throw data to the cloud as that huge data lake, so to speak rather. So I think that this actually will allow cybersecurity to actually become better and more educated. So threat intel becomes more accurate. So I'm excited about it.
Yeah, and collective defense and many of the other terms that are out there around some of this stuff. This does open the door for a lot more capability in that space.
Absolutely. Well, this is really illuminating. I think that it adds a lot of clarity to the point that maybe these 2,700 pages can be distilled into these key points. I want to cover kind of some of the updates on the poll questions. Yeah, real quick. What CIP impact ratings apply to your utility operation? It looks like about half said medium impact, about a quarter says low impact, and another half says no impact at all. So it looks like rather evenly distributed, which is weird because that actually is multiple choice. So it looks like we have a pretty even spread between medium impact and no impact. Nobody, by the way, has selected high impact, which is interesting. By the way, these will be updated with all poll takers once we cut this feed. 2, what best describes your operations use of cloud today? About a quarter says evaluating. Another 25% said using cloud for OT data. And then the remaining majority, assuming and knowing that this is multiple choice, they're already using cloud for IT and they're just evaluating its movement into OT as well, which is pretty interesting, kind of as we suspected and discussed. And last, the results for how will the BCSI proposed changes affect the organization. Single choice, so we can only achieve 100% here. half said no changes at all. And then it looks like we have almost 20% saying welcome change to third-party cloud services, and the remainder says that they're resistant and highly limited use of third-party cloud services is how it stands today and will in the future. So pretty interesting, rather even spread. So I'm going to end this poll for the chat. I look forward to getting your guys' follow-up, and we will reach out to you after we cut this webinar. So thanks to Jamie, thanks to Patrick, and thanks for joining the webinar. NERC Cloud, what next?
Thank you for
Awesome.
joining. Thanks, Patrick.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Bye.